Can you please raise your hand if you drink coffee? Okay, so a decent amount. So maybe you can guess how long it takes to farm, produce, and brew a cup of coffee. Can you guys raise your hand if you think it takes 3 to 5 years? If you think it takes 8 to 12 months? And 1 to 2 years? Okay, so the correct answer is actually 3 to 5 years.
So, as you know, 3 to 5 years is a very long time, but what actually happens during this process is important. It doesn't just go from a plant to your cup. So during online learning, before we started term, we learned about the seed to cup process, which is essentially the harvesting, washing, brewing, roasting, all of it, of the coffee bean. And we were tasked with making a timeline to get through all of the different steps and go from country to country. So we wanted to showcase 3 of our classmates' work. We have Callie on the left, Chloe in the middle, and Maya behind me.
Okay, so we've just looked at how coffee goes from the seed to cup, but going back to the harvesting of the coffee bean, there are 2 kinds of beans, Arabica and Robusta. Can people raise their hand if they know the difference between the 2?
So, it looks like people in our module.
Yeah.
That's about it. Okay, so there are a lot of differences regarding the harvesting and the location and all of that to do with Arabica, but you guys are all consumers, we're consumers, so the most important part for us is the taste. So if you look at the flavor notes of Robusta, or Arabica, sorry, it's usually fruity and caramel. It's a lot sweeter. There's low caffeine. It's used for specialty coffee. We learned about 3 different waves of coffee, and it's used in the higher grade. So it's better quality, which makes it more expensive.
And Robusta, which is actually quite different to Arabica, has a more nutty, bitter flavor with a much higher caffeine content, lower sugar levels as well. And fun fact, Vietnam is the world's largest Robusta producer. And the reason why the Robusta is at a lower price is because it can be grown in different climates as opposed to Arabica.
Robusta is also the base for all of Vietnam's signature coffee drinks. So there's drinks like egg coffee, salt coffee, coconut coffee. There's a long list, and we got to try all of them over
Thin
our module.
coffee.
Thin coffee. But Vietnam's a very trend-based country, so it seems to be every 3 months there's a new trend, there's a new wave, and that is a signature coffee for the time, and cafes have to fight to keep up with it.
Okay, so now that we've explained the difference between the 2 kinds of beans, let's go back to the history of coffee in Vietnam. So we're going to start off all the way back to 1857 when the French first colonized Vietnam. They introduced coffee to Vietnam, and coffee production began in the highlands all the way until the French left Vietnam and the Vietnam War began. The Vietnam War, or also known as the American War, went on from 1955 all the way to 1975, halting all coffee production and severely affecting it. Coffee farms were destroyed, and it was just terrible. Anyways, post-war, going to the 2000s, coffee production restarted, and Vietnam became this world's second largest coffee producer after Brazil. Now looking at modern day, in 2025, coffee is a large part of Vietnam's culture, as I'm sure most of you've noticed in Hanoi.
So raise your hand if you prefer to study in a cafe. Okay. Now put your hands down. Raise your hand if you prefer to go to a cafe to hang out with your friends. Half and half. Okay, so Vietnamese coffee culture is a lot targeted towards the latter. The idea in Vietnam is you go to a cafe. There are some work cafes, but mostly with the intention of talking to your friends. It's a very social space because it's so embedded in the history. So over the course of our module, one of the first things we did was learn about design psychology, We took a course by Leslie, who I think is actually here tonight.
Shout out Leslie.
Shout out Leslie. Go find her. But she taught us a lot about different fabrics, how they make your brain act and react, what different colors, different things can symbolize, how to subtly embed culture on all of that. And then we also learned about cafe as a third space. It's not, home, it's not work, it's an area where you can talk and do other things. And that was really important. You can see Cafe Slow here, and just more cafes with chairs and emphasis on conversation and just getting to know people instead of just sitting, at a Starbucks with your laptop.
Yeah.
So, Natasha, we've been asking a lot of questions to the audience, but I have a question for you. So, can you tell me the difference in interior design between these two cafes that I know you've been to, Cafe Din and Cafe Slow?
Okay, so Cafe Din, the one on the left, was actually the first cafe we visited in our module. Leslie took us. And so right off the bat, you can tell that this cafe, it feels more authentic. It's actually a family business. It was one of the first cafes that opened up after the war. You can tell that there's smaller tables and chairs and a much more narrow space. This cafe is different to Cafe Slow. Cafe Slow is wider, much more open, it's very nature-oriented, has a brown and green color palette with a hero color of red, and is influenced by Western design. Okay, so Nora, I know that you've been to both these cafes as well. Can you tell me what different stories there are in these two cafes?
I can. So on the left, there's Reaching Out Cafe, which we visited in Hoi An over our We Explore. And we got a lantern making workshop there, but we learned that it's run by people primarily who are deaf, mute, and physically disabled, people with disabilities. And it's a quiet cafe. And so that was we just worked there. There's tables specifically for you to work. It's not a social cafe, which goes against a lot of Vietnam's usual customs. And then on the right, we have room 501, which is the last cafe that we visited. And we got a workshop about the design. We got a presentation. It was really helpful, but it's such a unique cafe. It's based on art and a concept run by the owners. All of their drinks follow a menu that only lasts like 3 months. They change their menu every 3 months. And the current one was, they're moving from metamorphosis to kaleidoscope, and it's about the beginning, present, and then the next one is going to be the death of life. So we've been asking a lot of questions up here, but the reason why is because since OL, we've been trying to follow one specific question.
Okay, so our driving question for our module was, how can I design a cafe space with a signature drink to embody the modern culture and past heritage of Vietnamese coffee?
So we've talked about the modern and heritage part of it, but what would we do in the future with our cafes?
So through our module, we did a barista course, which you can see over here, where we practice making our signature drinks. Shout out to Callie, who won.
And we also learned about a lot of traditional Vietnamese coffee. We learned how to make normal coffee, or normal Western coffee, like by using espresso machines and all of that, but we use fin roasters. We learned how to make egg coffee, which was fun. A bunch of different unique flavors that are really specific to Vietnam. We spent 2 full days at that barista course.
So for the summative part of our module, we decided to highlight 4 different students in different aspects of their projects. So here we have Haruka's.
So Haruka, we really wanted to highlight his concept. It was really unique. Most of us made 1 cafe, and he decided to make 3. And they're based in different parts of Asia. So at the top, there's Japan, and then China and Korea. So he really wanted to highlight minimalism as well as cultural storytelling and authenticity in his work. So all of his creations and all of his cafes, they have the same brand, but they're all unique in their culture.
So the second person we highlighted was Aryan. We wanted to focus on his ethos and the story of his cafe. So he focused on the process from farming to brewing to getting into your cup, the cup of coffee. And he focused how it's a full cycle and it's a cyclical process, which is why everything you can see is in a circular shape. He has a conveyor belt as well. And it just overall shows the interconnectedness of the whole process.
Next, we have Yosef. So besides making mood boards and like plans and ethoses, we had to use a software called Planner 5D to make a digital interactive layout of our designs. And Yosef really wanted to highlight community, refined soul, depth, and culture. So you can see he has his 3D and 2D layouts here. He had a very big open space. It took you through almost like a museum of his culture and Vietnamese culture, and it was embedded in both. And he really wanted to highlight a place for conversation and over coffee. The coffee was just like a vessel for the conversation to happen.
And the last person was Aston. We highlighted her signature drink, which was inspired from her upbringing. She was born in Texas in the US, and she grew up in Bali, so this drink really goes back to her upbringing. Also, her cafe turns into a speakeasy at night, and so we thought that concept was really cool.
So we're at the end of the module now, so we want to talk about our takeaways. So the first takeaway, we asked everyone in our module what they thought the biggest takeaway was, and we had a lot, but a unanimous one was the idea of intentionality, and that's both being intentional as someone going into a cafe to notice things, and also realizing the intentionality in the seed to cup process. It takes so many years for the bean to become a cup of coffee, and realizing, why a cafe owner put their chairs that way or put that poster up, and all of it has intention behind it.
And the second takeaway that we gathered was the story behind every cafe. I think before this module, I would go into a cafe with one objective, which was to get my coffee and also work. Now I go into a cafe and I actually realize that most cafes have a story behind it, which was proven through our module experience.
Okay, so thank you to our whole module, including our educators, Sam and Sophie.
And thank you to all of our guest speakers as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.